Well, hello everyone, it is Ben Hardy here, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about how manufacturers and sometimes even car dealers buy customers and how this actually kind of messes up the whole market. Before we get into this video though, as always, if you want to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. And then if you want to see more videos just like this, then I recommend you subscribe because I post content every single day. Let's get into it. So to properly explain today's topic, we quickly need to talk about how automakers even determine the prices of new vehicles, because it's not as simple as supply and demand or as simple as automakers just pricing vehicles as high as they possibly can to make the most amount of profit. Automakers look at a lot of different things to determine, what segments they're going to sell vehicles within and then how they're actually going to price those vehicles. So first off, in terms of determining a segment, automakers only want to build vehicles within segments that they feel like represent their brand well. And so automakers won't sell vehicles in segments that could be very profitable because they just don't align with their brand. A good example would be Subaru selling diesel trucks, right? Subaru's all about building quirky hatchbacks that are good at off-roading. And so a diesel truck being all about power and towing, it's not on brand for them. And so although they could make a bunch of money building a diesel truck, right, selling a diesel truck, it's just not on brand. And so that's why you'll see American automakers like Ford build diesel trucks, but a Japanese automaker like Subaru would never build a diesel truck. It just doesn't make sense for them. And so because these automakers are focusing on segments that are on brand for them, it makes it so segments have certain, appearances to the general public. And so like if you think small fuel efficient car, then you're probably going to think Toyota, Honda, Kia, something like that, right? And because certain automakers are associated with certain segments, then that kind of pins those segments into certain price points. Because again, you think small fuel efficient car, you're going to think, okay, well that car has to be, relatively inexpensive from a purchase price perspective because it's probably going to be built by a non-luxury automaker and it's probably not going to have a ton of features because with that particular category of car, you don't expect to get a lot of features. And so that obviously comes into play with, determining the prices within these different segments. But of course, it's more than just that. Something else that's taken into account is how much it costs to produce vehicles within a particular segment, right? Like how many features have to be stuffed into this vehicle? How much is that going to cost? How much is it going to cost to build the engine or, whatever is going to power the car, whether it's, an ICE car or a fully electric car. And so the actual cost of production is taken into account. But something to mention is some vehicles that are extremely inexpensive don't have great profit margins in general because obviously they're inexpensive, but sometimes they even have negative profit margins because automakers just build vehicles within certain segments because they feel like that segment, again, represents their brand well, and they're hoping that they will basically pull customers within their brand to then buy higher profit vehicles down the road because they happen to help them out with a super affordable vehicle to start off with. And then the next big thing in terms of determining pricing is going to be the demographic that purchases from a particular segment. How old is the demographic, right? Where do they live in terms of region? And then again, what type of experience are they expecting from the buying experience with that car, but then also, with the driving experience as well. And so the demographic is also really important because, certain demographics are more than okay with paying premiums with certain features and other demographics are not. A good example would be something like heated or cooled seats. A lot of non-luxury cars will make heated or cooled seats standard with certain packages, or they'll make it so that it's a very inexpensive option. But then if you look at like a luxury car, something like heated or cooled seats could not only not be standard, but it could be a pretty expensive package that you have to add to the vehicle. And the feature itself is probably not all that different from car to car, but the demographic that's purchasing those vehicles is the difference. And so this is all pulled together to help automakers determine what they should price a car at. Again, they're going to pick a particular segment they want to sell a vehicle within. They're obviously going to see what the competition is pricing their vehicles at within that segment. And then, they're obviously going to look at their own production costs and then what demographic they are trying to attract within that segment. And based on all that, they will obviously be able to spit out a price on the car. Now, obviously, most automakers try to not be the most expensive within a segment because, they're the most expensive and it's going to be hard to convince buyers within a segment to, jump up to the top. But they also typically don't want to be the least expensive either because An automaker can make a product that is absolutely fantastic, and if they price it too low, then consumers might think that there's something wrong with it, right? Even though it could be an amazing product, if it's the cheapest within a segment, then people might be like, oh, it must be, the off-brand version of that particular type of car, and I want to get, the solid on-brand version, if that makes sense. And so there's quite a bit that goes into it, but that's the gist. And so this leads us into talking about when automakers decide to buy customers within a particular segment, and how dealers sometimes also do this on a smaller scale, and why this particular practice in the short term can actually benefit dealers and manufacturers a pretty decent amount. But in the long term, it actually damages the brand quite a bit. And let's talk about some examples, and then let's explain why this is this way. So an example from a manufacturer standpoint would be a manufacturer releasing a huge rebate on a vehicle that makes their vehicle priced significantly below the competition, or a manufacturer releasing an all-new vehicle and having the MSRP set at a price that, again, is also significantly below the competition. Either route functions the same, to where they're pricing their vehicle way cheaper than anyone else in a particular segment. And so this is how they're obviously buying customers, because although I said earlier in the video that if a manufacturer has a vehicle priced way lower than the competition, then people might assume that it's less premium. If it's low enough, and if people are able to actually experience the product themselves, they might find that, oh, well, the product actually is really good, and since I'm saving all this money, then it's a no-brainer, right? Money talks at the end of the day. If you have two vehicles that are in the same segment and they're pretty competitive from a spec perspective, right? The space is the same, the engine is pretty similar in terms of power, performance, fuel economy, all that, but one is, $5,000 less expensive than the other, you're probably going to purchase the less expensive model, even if it's from a brand that you don't consider as premium, because, well, you just saved $5,000 to get a similar car and similar driving experience. And let's talk about some real-world examples. So in 2018 rather, Ram released the new 2019 Ram 1500. And upon initial release, they didn't have any sort of discounts on the truck. There weren't any rebates or anything like that. Some dealers were discounting them slightly off of MSRP, but for the most part, the trucks were initially selling around MSRP. Now, fast forward a year after release into 2019, and Ram decides that they want to get a bunch of market share within the truck world. So they released a rebate on the truck that gave customers 15% off of MSRP, and then dealerships could in turn also discount more off of that. And so like the dealership that I worked at, for example, we had that 15% rebate, and then on top of that, we were selling the trucks for like under invoice. And so at the end of the whole ordeal, customers were getting something like over 20% off of the MSRP on trucks. Like, I purchased a truck during this month, and I purchased a 2019 Ram Rebel that had an MSRP of $59,000, and I bought it for like $44,000. I mean, that's a huge discount, $15,000 off of MSRP for a roughly $60,000 truck. And so it accomplished what Ram wanted to do. They gained a bunch of market share, and they actually passed up Chevy in terms of sales in the 2019 model year. But this is where it gets into how it kind of damaged things within the market. So the first thing that happened is the resale value on the truck kind of slid a little bit. Now, it didn't happen right away. It took a few months. But when you have people knowing that they could have purchased a truck for a huge discount off of MSRP, and frankly, the truck still had rebates after that, they weren't as strong, but they were still pretty strong overall, then they weren't really incentivized to buy a used version of that truck. And so, the demand being lower meant that the used prices started to kind of erode, and it put consumers that had purchased earlier iterations of that truck in a pretty bad situation, because again, a lot of them paid close to MSRP, and so that made it appear that the resale value on the new Ram 1500 wasn't all that great, which is not good for consumers that want to then go and buy another vehicle from the automaker. And so it obviously messes up the used market on a vehicle when a manufacturer prices it way too low, and then, obviously will naturally raise the price over time, because an automaker can only lose so much money before they have to, price the vehicle with where it should be priced at, right? And actually make it so that it's something that's profitable for the company. But the next downside is that the new car sales, they didn't plummet like a massive amount, but they did slow down after that month, and they continue to kind of stay slow with the truck overall. And again, this isn't just isolated to this situation with the Ram 1500. This happens with other vehicles as well when automakers decide to price them, again, way below market. And so it leads to this effect where automakers in the short term will accomplish the goal of selling more vehicles, but in the long term, it makes it so their vehicles have lower resale value. And on top of that, it makes it so that buying demand for their vehicle in the future will be lower because, well, their customers are accustomed to paying lower prices. And once the automaker raises the prices again back to normal, then the consumers are just going to wait because they're going to be like, oh, well, they're going to have to release an incentive again if they want to sell the vehicles. And when you have that pullback, it's not a great situation. And this happens with dealers as well, just on a much smaller scale. So what you will see sometimes is, you'll have a particular group of dealerships that'll be within a certain sales region, and they'll all, typically have their cars priced roughly the same amount. But then one dealer will decide that they want to just sell a bunch of cars one month. And so then they'll discount all of their inventory a massive amount, and that'll obviously attract customers to purchase cars from them rather than the other dealers. And so in the short term, again, they will accomplish what they are trying to do with, their goals of selling more vehicles. But in the long term, what it does is it typically pushes the other dealers to also lower their prices, which sounds great for the consumers on the surface. But again, in a similar situation to what you see with automakers, they realize that they're selling more cars, but they're not making as much profit. And so then they naturally will raise prices back up. But then it kind of messes up the whole market dynamic within that particular region because now all the dealers are again selling the cars at the prices they had them at before. But you have these consumers that are used to paying lower prices, and so then the whole demand dynamic kind of pulls back, and so it messes up the whole situation. So in summary, manufacturers and sometimes even dealerships will lower their prices to amounts that are far lower than their competition to basically sell more cars. Again, they're essentially buying customers, and in the short term, it will accomplish that goal, right? It will make it so they sell more vehicles, but in the long term, it messes up the market and it messes up consumers' perception of that product because, what manufacturers and what dealerships need to realize is that people associate certain prices with product based on, what they ended up paying for that vehicle when they bought it. And so if you do these pushes where vehicles get discounted a massive amount and then obviously it leads to a bunch of people buying cars, well, they're then going to associate that product with that price. And so once prices naturally rise back up to levels that actually make sense within a regular market so that, again, a manufacturer and a dealership can be profitable, well, it leads to customers not wanting to purchase that product because, well, first off, the resale value on their product's not going to be as good because people know that, well, you could have paid less for a brand new one. And then, again, the people that going in to buy the new ones, they're like, why would I pay this when I could have paid that just a few months ago? Or why would I pay this when I did pay that just a few months ago or maybe a year ago or whatever? And so it's kind of one of those short-term plays that, again, it can seem very appealing to move the extra volume, but I would say that it's probably not worth it. And what I would instead do is just make sure that the product is priced competitively. So if it's a dealership, just make sure that you're within line in terms of pricing within your particular region. Like, that's what makes sense because pricing within particular regions is generally determined by just natural supply and demand when it comes to dealerships. And then when it comes to automakers, well, if your product is really good, then people will pay the prices ultimately. If your product stands out within a segment, then people will pay the prices. The only reason why you're going to have to, buy customers is if your product doesn't stand out. And so, instead of just lowering the prices crazy amounts, maybe go back to the drawing board, change the product so then it's more appealing within that segment. That's going to sum things up. I know this was a weird video topic, but it's something that I wanted to talk about because I find it interesting. Anyways,